building and advocacy arm of the community economic development movement in Massachusetts. In the fall of 2018, we teamed with Mass Inc. to bring together stakeholders to address the unique challenges faced by many lower income neighborhoods in the Commonwealth. The neighborhoods struggle with the challenge of weak real estate markets, where low rents and declining values make it difficult to maintain an aging housing stock. We're thrilled that the seeds that were planted from these initial conversations 3 years ago have grown into a robust statewide effort embodied in the Neighborhood Hub, and very excited to be part of it and to witness its impact in a growing number of communities, as Francis explained. Beyond this, I just want to mention the American Rescue Plan Act as a resource here. Beyond the state's investments in neighborhood stabilization, we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity provided by the American Rescue Plan Act and the $5.3 billion in federal funds, which can support both homeownership opportunities and improve the health and safety of the existing housing stock in Massachusetts. Governor Baker has proposed $500 million to expand homeownership opportunities for first-time homebuyers through down payment and mortgage assistance, and $200 million to support housing production to help communities of color build wealth by promoting homeownership among the residents of disproportionately impacted municipalities. MACDC fully supports this proposal, as well as the governor's proposals to increase the supply of affordable rental housing. MACDC is also asking the legislature to allocate $100 million in ARPA funds, evenly split between making existing homes lead safe and making other essential home improvement to make homes healthier and safer. What we're calling the Mass Healthy Homes Initiative will improve the quality and safety of thousands of homes across the Commonwealth, and thereby improve the health of families currently living in these homes and the generations of families who will live in the homes in the future. If you want to find out more about this initiative, you can reach out to me. I will put my email address in the chat. So I will now turn things over to Katharine Robb from the Harvard Kennedy School.
Good morning. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, could I get permission to share?
Oh, yes, of course. Give me one moment. You would think you would just have it, wouldn't you? Allow panelists to start video. Allow, you know what? I may just have to share it for you because I don't see the option. So give me
Oh,
one.
no.
No,
I did make a few updates to the presentation since I sent it to you, but I think it should be fine.
Make host. If I make you host, you'll be able to do it. Okay, try it now.
Oh, great. Yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
Teamwork.
Yay, great. All right. So good morning. My name is Kate Robb. I'm a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative. And my work focuses on urban environmental health issues in the US and in low-income settings abroad. And I'm really excited to be a part of this webinar this morning, and a big thank you to MassHousing and especially Francis for organizing. Today I'll be talking about my work in Chelsea, Massachusetts on leveraging housing inspectors and city data to improve public health and also increase the effectiveness, efficiency, and equity in local government. So as many of you well know, substandard housing is a growing public health problem across the United States, and risks in homes can stem from physical aspects of the environment, such as insect infestations that can lead to asthma triggers. It can stem from poor maintenance that can lead to injuries, and also social aspects of the home environment, such as overcrowded conditions that may contribute to psychosocial stress or abuse. And so housing is so much more than just a physical structure. It really has a profound impact on our health. And breaking this link between poor housing and poor health is a really important mechanism for reducing social inequality and improving public health. And one of the mechanisms to break this link is the development and enforcement of housing codes. Housing codes set minimum standards for habitability, and these include things like ensuring a home has a smoke detector or that there's adequate protection from the elements. And housing inspectors working for local governments enforce these codes. And by nature of their work inside homes and really close contact with residents, housing inspectors are some of the only public officials to witness a broad range of threats to public health and safety and are in a really unique position to intervene. However, their work is often reactive once a problem has already become severe, and it's often resource constrained and limited in the types of remedial tools and partnerships that are available to actually solve problems that are identified. So the work I'll be presenting today took place in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where in 2018, I served as a Summer Innovation Fellow. As many of you know, Chelsea is one of the most densely populated cities in the state. The majority of residents are people of color, immigrants, and low-income families. And home values in Chelsea have more than doubled since 2015, and over 70% of the city are renters. And so residents cope with rising rental costs through doubling or tripling up, or living in more substandard conditions. And in my work in Chelsea, I spent a good deal of time accompanying housing inspectors in their rounds. And we would come upon families living in, whole families living in a single room, people living in closets without proper ventilation or means of escape from fire. Housing inspectors would describe to me coming upon entire families living on porches in the winter without heat or running water or toilets. And we also saw less dire, but still significant conditions such as really severe mold or insect infestations. And so housing code enforcement has this tremendous potential to improve health by identifying and intervening on the scenarios like the ones I described. However, housing code enforcement is often limited in its effectiveness, efficacy, and equity in addressing these really pressing public health concerns. It's not as effective as it could be because cities are often not aware of the problems until they're severe, and many problems just go undetected. Inspection is also not as efficient as it could be because code enforcement often operates within its own department with little coordination of data and strategies across health and other departments. And lack of actionable data makes it difficult to prioritize where inspections should be with limited time and resources, where they could lead the biggest, achieve the biggest impact. And then finally, code enforcement is not as equitable as it could be because housing inspectors often have broad discretion in prioritizing which properties to inspect. And also the most vulnerable residents are the least likely to file complaints. And so this leads to unequal government protection. However, cities increasingly have data, have digitalized property level data that can be linked across different departments and be used to inform more data-driven responses. And given the really central role of housing and health, even marginally increasing the impact of housing code enforcement could improve public health. And so these data to do so may come from police or fire departments, from tax assessor databases, from utilities, and a range of other city data sources. And they can all be aggregated at the property or parcel level. So during the time I spent working in Chelsea, I also worked to identify and aggregate these different city data sets. So today I'll be talking about two studies that I've been working on in Chelsea. The first is a study to determine if machine learning can outperform current practices in identifying properties with housing code violations that threaten public health. And to do this, my team and I developed 3 models to predict the probability that a given property would have any of the 30 or so housing code violations that are issued in the city, also a set of some of the highest risk code violations, and then also a specific code violation that's of great importance in Chelsea, which is a code violation related to overcrowded living conditions. And in the second study, I'll be describing a study on describing the impact of integrating a social service referral program within housing inspection. So it's not enough to identify these high-risk properties, but we also need to bring solutions to that match the nature of the problems that are identified. So for this this first study, using available city data, we use data from 1,600 properties that had been proactively inspected in the city since 2015. And using the data that we'd accumulated across city departments, like the size and age and value of homes, police and fire calls to the property, number of building permits, home sales, other factors that may predict housing code violations. We brought those data sets together. We used a specific subset of the houses that had been proactively inspected to train these machine learning models. And then we used a different subset to test how well they actually worked in predicting housing code violations. And then we then mapped the predicted probability of each of these three different outcomes onto a map of the city to see where and how widespread the problems were. And we also made a list of the top ranked riskiest properties that could be prioritized for inspection and intervention. So just to start with looking at the prevalence and location of housing code violations in the city. So these are actually observed violations, not our predicted violations, but housing code violations were present in 54% of inspected properties in the city, 85% of which represented high risk to health violations, and 29% of properties had a violation related to overcrowding. So housing codes stipulate really the bare minimum standard for habitable housing. And the fact that more than half of Chelsea's renters live in a home with at least one housing code violation is significant. Then looking at the predicted housing code violations. So these figures show a map of the city of Chelsea. Each dot represents a parcel or property in the city, with green being a low risk for a certain type of housing code violation and red being a high risk for that housing code violation, with any violation on the left and then overcrowding violations on the right. And so we can see that the risk for any housing code violation is more widespread within the city, whereas for overcrowding, that risk is really concentrated in certain parts of the city. And so beyond code enforcement, knowing the location of housing related health risks, such as, for example, asthma triggers or fall hazards, could help city departments and community organizations know where resources could be targeted and could be most beneficial. So the main goal of the study was to determine if machine learning could outperform the current inspectional practices. And so under the current practices, inspectors meet monthly to identify areas of the city to inspect based on observed deteriorating conditions or based on calls from other departments reporting suspected violations. And using their current practices, about 45% of inspections identify at least one housing code violation. However, if the city were to inspect the top ranked 600 properties with the highest probability of inspection, and 600 is really the capacity that is available each year for housing inspection, we would expect that 81% would have a housing code violation. And so compared to current practices, using the machine learning model would represent almost a twofold or 1.8-fold increase in the number of inspections that result in identifying code violations. And so the Inspectional Services Department in Chelsea had planned to trial the use of risk-based inspections in 2020. However, we had to postpone this trial due to the COVID-19 pandemic when housing inspectors stopped going inside properties except for on a very limited set of criteria basis. But we hope to be able to trial this, this program in the coming year. So the main takeaway of this study is that integrated city data machine learning can make housing code enforcement more efficient, effective, and equitable in reducing health risks from unsafe housing. It can be more efficient because intervention at a greater number, we can intervene at a greater number of properties without increasing inspectional resources. It's more effective because inspectors can mitigate risks at more homes and reach those homes sooner if they prioritize homes that have a violation, and more equitable because risk-based inspection prioritizes services to properties and individuals with the greatest need. However, some important critiques of housing inspection are that housing inspection can be overly punitive and lead to displacement of residents. Issuing a citation for a violation within a home can do very little or actually cause problems when the underlying cause of that violation is poverty, mental illness, or range of other conditions. And so code enforcement should be coupled with service provision when appropriate. Through a novel social service referral program within the city of Chelsea, housing inspectors are able to do just that. So I'll now be describing the results of a study that I've been working on with the city of Chelsea. That's an effort that began back in 2018 to integrate social services within housing code enforcement. So through this program that I co-developed with housing inspectors and city leadership, when an inspector during their routine inspections identifies a resident in need of support beyond what can be provided through the inspector's work, this could range from families experiencing a crisis due to impending eviction or needing access to vital services like heating fuel. They can make a referral to a designated case manager at a social service agency that's partnered with the city. The case manager then contacts the resident, most often meeting them in their home, to determine what type of support is needed. And if the resident accepts, then the case manager connects the resident with the type of services that they need and provides follow-up care. And code enforcement work continues at the property, and the outcomes and progress are shared with inspectors and city leadership on a monthly basis. So the program has been in place since 2019. And when inspectors encounter a problem that can't be resolved through issuing a citation alone, they have the ability to link residents with services. This includes landlords and renters. And some of the services that have been linked to date include services for heating and food assistance, healthcare connections, including substance use treatment and mental health services, hoarding cleanup, and homelessness prevention services, and a range of other services as well. And the program makes the value of identifying high-risk properties and linking residents with early intervention and support services even greater. So we also did some qualitative interviews to understand the impact of the program. And we found that housing inspectors reported increased work efficiency and reduced psychological burden as a result of the program. So as one inspector said, so we see all these social service problems and there wasn't a lot we could do. It's terrible. When you're alone in a house, you see how people live, you see no food or that person that clearly has a mental health issue, and that's not our job. There's not a lot we could do. And then after the program came into place, inspectors said the program took away the piece of the inspection that was causing problems for us. If people were going to be evicted or have mental health issues or can't pay rent, these we can refer to the social service agency that has the time to case manage people's needs. we still saw problems in-house. We just refer our most challenging that are outside the scope of our jobs. So the interviewees also described residents receiving better care through the program because it was addressing underlying causes of the problems that were resulting in code violations. And so this also freed up inspectors to do more inspections. And importantly, the program resulted in residents being both connected with services they needed, but also reported improved conditions in the neighborhood or homes surrounding the homes that received help. So as one inspector said, once you fix one bad building, the rest of the neighborhood gets better. Kids are going out and playing on the sidewalk where they weren't before. So it's in most of these cases we've referred, it's almost like it's helping the whole neighborhood, not just one person. So in conclusion, housing inspectors' encounters with residents present this really unique opportunity to expand and to reach an otherwise hidden population and expand public health impact of code enforcement work. And integrated city data and machine learning can be used to estimate the prevalence and spatial distribution of housing related problems in cities and make housing code enforcement more effective, equitable, and efficient in responding to public health risks. So thank you so much. And a special thanks to my collaborators, Ashley Marcoux, Nico Diaz-Amigo, York DeYoung, and many of the staff at Chelsea City Hall. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Katharine, for that presentation. Just before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself. Good morning, all. My name is Ricky Ochillo. I'm a relationship manager at MassHousing. I work with a diverse business engagement department. My work involves connecting diverse businesses to our multifamily projects on the construction and management company side based on the financing that MassHousing provides for affordable housing development. Please feel free to visit our website at www.masshousing.com for more information about our programs and outreach. I'm happy to be part of the discussion this morning, understanding that healthy and affordable homes are integral to supporting residents' quality of life, strengthening community well-being, and ensuring that we all shape environments where we can live and thrive. So with that, I will open the virtual floor for questions. Please send your questions to the chat. Any questions for Dr. Katharine?
Ricky, there's 2 in the Q&A if you want to ask those.
Okay. So we have one question from Liz Murphy. Can you talk about how referrals are made? Is it an inspector providing a phone number to call, getting permission to provide contact info to the social service provider? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, Liz, a great question. So it's both those mechanisms. So depending on the nature of what's going on and how comfortable, both the inspector or resident feel, the inspectors all have a little note card with information about social services that may be available. They can share with the resident with a contact number to call the social service referral agency that's been designated by the city for this purpose. But then also in many cases, and I actually would say most cases, the inspector is talking with the resident, gets their permission to then call the social service agency themselves. They talk with the case manager there, and then the case manager reaches out to the resident and meets with them to determine if and what kind of service is needed.
Great, thank you for that response. We have another interesting question from Maggie House based on your machine learning topic. So she asked, did you find that after implementing machine learning to identify risk areas, inspectors had less time to inspect these areas if more were being identified, or that inspecting was more efficient and therefore inspectors had more time to do their job effectively?
Yeah, another great question. So unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to actually trial the use of the risk-based inspection because if we finished our study just as the COVID-19 pandemic began and inspectors stopped entering homes, with the exception of a few types of scenarios. And so, so we don't know exactly all of the data I presented on the risk-based inspection is what we would predict based on the available data. But in talking with inspectors, and actually, is this question written down? Because I forget the second part of that question. Oh yeah.
The second part of her question was, once inspecting was complete, did you find that it was more efficient and therefore inspectors had more time to do their job effectively based on the impact of machine learning?
Okay, yeah. So we don't know yet, unfortunately, what the impact of using the risk-based model. However, with the social service program, inspectors did report that they did have more time available to do more inspections because they weren't being held up in responding to a lot of social or health needs that were really beyond their scope, but we're holding up bringing a house to code. And so rather than following up with a property, many times, they would go once, call the social service agency, they would follow up, and then it maybe just be one more visit until they could bring the home into compliance. And so they were able to increase the number of homes that they could inspect.
Okay, great. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next presenter. So allow me to pass it over to Mr. Aaron Vega. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Good morning, everybody. Katharine, great presentation. Definitely could utilize some of that data once you have it up and running or implement that program out here in Holyoke. Want to thank Frances and her team at MassHousing. It's great to see everybody. As some of you may know, I was the state representative for the city of Holyoke, the 5th Hamden District, for 8 years prior to being in this role. And I was part of that Gateway Cities Caucus that pushed things like this and TDI and other programs. So it's really great to sort of be on the receiving end now to use these tools here in Holyoke, as I am now the director of the Office of Planning and Economic Development. And so a couple of things I'll say before I share screen. We have in Holyoke, but across the Commonwealth, I think we have a shared crisis, and that's the housing crisis, and we know it. And it's exacerbated because things take so darn long to get housing back online. Whether it's the big developments that we work on here in Holyoke with someone like Wind Development and taking 6 years to get tax credits to even get the phase 1 moving forward, whether it's sort of working with local developers, it's just not easy. And the incentives put forward by the state are helpful, but I would say not helpful enough, having been on both sides of it now. And I'll mention a little bit more of that after the presentation. But there's also an opportunity here. Obviously, there's an opportunity to reinvent a city, to reinvent what's happening, and to be able to provide for a community all the kind of housing options that we need. And that's something I think that's critical. Frances mentioned before at the beginning of the presentation about the cost of construction and the differences of rents. That's one thing that is important to note, but also important to note is that places like Holyoke, where people are really, we're a gateway city, which really means that people over the last 100 years, immigrants, migrants, came to places like Holyoke and Lawrence and Fall River and New Bedford and Chelsea to build a life. And in order to do that, having an ability for home ownership was key. Places like Holyoke now, you cannot even buy a house for under $180,000. Our normal rents are $1,400, $1,200 to $1,400. We're not even talking market rate. So that ability for anyone to move up the economic ladder and stay in places like Holyoke becomes more and more challenging. So having the opportunity to work on something like the Neighborhood Hub really starts to address those opportunities. And then of course, the biggest challenge that we face is capacity. And so for us to do the work that this Neighborhood Hub is allowing to do, we couldn't have done this work without it. And so collaborations are very key. So the collaboration with MassHousing to help us get this information and do this work is key. We've had a great collaboration with Lynn Sweet and her company, having boots on the ground and having a team be able to analyze and present the data. Again, something that we do not have the capacity in the city to do. It's these programs that are provided by the state that allow an office like mine to actually get the work done that we couldn't do on our own. And then, of course, our other partners in collaboration on this is our CDC, One Holyoke Development, now run by Michael Moriarty. And they were able to sort of partner with us in this program, looking specifically at their units in the catchment area, which I'll bring up in a moment, in the study area, and talk about a capital needs assessment for them. So we were able to sort of look at the needs that we needed in this office, how we would work with developers, and then also utilize this grant to help our CDC. So that's really the key. And then the last thing I'll say before I go to the presentation is that information is key. As Katharine was mentioning, having this data, having this information gives us a better perspective of what we have as opportunities here. And so data and information are key. So with that, I will share my screen. And again, this whole webinar stuff is weird because I don't know who's out there. So I'm assuming you can see us. And I'm assuming that you can all see my screen. Thumbs up from the panelists. Yes, okay. So doesn't sound like it's totally full screen here. I'm not sure why that happened, but we will go forward. So there's some more art there. So again, I'm Aaron Vega, Lindy Sweet from LDS Consulting Group, and then Nelson from an organization, he's been our map person. So that's going to come into play in a moment. So again, as we applied for this grant, and again, this was set up before I came into office. I've been here about 8 months, so it's great to take the reins of this, was to identify locations for housing development in South Holyoke in the Flats neighborhood. We, of course, had a kickoff meeting with interested stakeholders. And what was, again, so key, what Lynn was able to bring with her team was an on-the-ground inventory. Again, no way can my office have the capacity to literally walk the streets for a week or more and inventory every property. We're creating base maps. We're identifying 5 sites within the study area for development. We're providing the attributes and the obstacles for those 5 sites. We're continuing with stakeholder interviews. Other developers that have worked in this area have worked with the city to understand the challenges and the opportunities. And the hope is that we will provide a toolkit at the end for developers, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Let's see if this will go full screen. Nah, I'm not going to mess with it too much. Okay, so apologize for that. It was full screen earlier.
Hey, Aaron, if you want to try again, I think if you go to that circle above the slide 3 of 7 in the bottom of the slide, the circle with the 3 dots, that, click it, and then screen, yep, click on. Oh, dang. No, I thought that would do it. Oh, well.
We try one more time. It said I don't want it to do it.
It's technology so hard.
I know, I just tried it, I tested it before.
I know, we do so
screen.
much, and then this happens. But you can try it. If not, it's, that's life.
Well, we'll go forward. So I can send the full presentation out if people want it. So we're going to map the capital needs for, as I mentioned, One Holyoke.
Hit
CDC.
display settings on the top.
All right, here we go.
Amazing. That's it.
There it is. Thanks, Lynn.
Teamwork.
See,
It's all about teamwork.
she's always helping us out, right? Provide development opportunities for 5 sites. And I'll just sidebar for a second. Sometimes we all know the issues with sites, right? Roofs, parking, what's the code upgrades going to be needed. But then interesting opportunities or challenges come before us. So we had a meeting with Lynn and one of our building owners, and there's an electrical capacity issue. So in addition to all the challenges that Holyoke has, we have a natural gas moratorium. So when you start to look at developing some of these old properties in neighborhoods, they literally do not have the electrical capacity coming into the building to provide opportunity and provide housing or provide economic development. So again, these sort of unique challenges that we continue to find. And something that we're really looking at, and again, if you know, I saw some pictures of downtown Chelsea, you go to any of our gateway cities, what made our downtown so vibrant was the commercial spaces on the ground floor and residential above. We've lost that residential above over the last couple decades. We still have a fair amount of commercial space. Often what it is that the building owner or the owner of the business, let's say if it's an insurance agency, has no desire to deal with tenants, quite frankly, right? And no desire to deal with that, what that would come with. So we're trying, but what kind of partnerships can happen? What kind of, you know, development partnerships with housing developers? What kind of collaborations can happen, whether it's condo-wise in the building, whether it's current co-ops? What other options are there to help building owners develop their entire building? So this is our study area, pretty large study area. The first two wards of Holyoke, wards 1 and ward 2, to the bottom of your screen would be South Holyoke, and to the upper part towards the river would be the flats. As some of you may or may not know, Holyoke was the first industrial planned city in America. All due respect to Lowell, but we were first, and we have a 60-foot drop in the Connecticut River that powers used to power a number of mill buildings throughout this area. You can see the canal system running through, coming off the Connecticut River, a 3-level canal. And it's interesting to note that this area was designed in such a way that people who lived there worked there. So this is residential intermixed with our industrial zone. So that again creates a number of other obstacles and opportunities to sort of rehab some of these old buildings, but also recognizing, as was mentioned, some of the environmental issues that may be there, brownfields, et cetera. So that intermingling of residential and industrial, I always say you cannot build Holyoke today. We are the city of easements. So any planners out there know exactly what I'm talking about. I've just come to recognize and start to understand the power of maps. I've always liked maps, old maps, maps of Holyoke, maps of the world, but the information now that can be put together on these maps, and just a shout out to Nels Nelson and him and what he's been able to do, and again, my planners here, what we can integrate into these maps. So along with that on the ground study, it's great to maybe have a document about it, but what does it look like? They were able to look at this area and give me a parking inventory, give the overall visual conditions of the buildings, right? Are there missing windows? Is it the broken window situation? How's the access look? You know, we didn't get inside the buildings, so we don't know the interior necessarily, but what's the exterior look like? Is there obvious, bricks falling off and the facades of buildings, what's happening? We were able to look at the values of the area and look at what else was happening in that area. In addition to residential, which is the key for this program, but what are some other redevelopment sites in that area? What could they be? Again, working with who owns those properties, often they're city owned, often they're privately owned, but nothing's happening on those properties. And as I mentioned, the difference between ground floor and upper floors. Another thing that we have with our zoning is called an Arts and Industry Overlay District, which allows for multi-use and allows for multi-residential units to happen in our downtown. And so we want to see commercial spaces on the ground floor. We want to see residential back. When you talk to people that have lived in Holyoke for their whole life or are generational here, they all talk about how it was, right? The neighborhoods all had their neighborhood grocery store, their neighborhood barbershop, everyone could live. When my dad moved here from Ecuador, I think he was 5 years old. I don't think he left the flats till he was 12 years old, right? I mean, the school was there, the grocery store was there, everything was right there in that community. That's no longer the case, but there is opportunity here. And of course, when it comes to that toolkit, we want to talk to developers. Even things like flood risks become issues and concerns for these areas. And again, especially when we talk about the climate change conditions that are happening, what are those infrastructure improvements that we're going to need to deal with those upcoming challenges that we have. So the idea now that all this information can be placed into this map is so great. And again, I've got great planners in my office, 2 great planners. They know GIS, but there's no way, again, we would have the time to even do a fraction of this work. So without the Neighborhood Hub grant, we would not be able to gather this information and start to work on the toolkit. We picked out 5 sites for possible additional development, some of them empty lots, some of them current buildings. And so again, the kind of the grading of it. You know, is it part of one Holyoke? Is it who owns it? The conditions, is it row houses and multifamily? And that fill-in, if there's anyone from the Gateway Cities Caucus, this has been something we've talked about so much, right? When you have neighborhoods that have that one or two properties that are just been neglected or abandoned, have been unfortunately taken over by perhaps people facing addiction or homelessness, those bring the property values down for everybody and the quality of life down for everybody. So again, sometimes it's those fill-in spaces that can change a neighborhood and change the potential development of that neighborhood. So I would say, so this is our information. I just want to take a moment. I'll leave that up for a moment in case anyone needs that. If anyone needs a good mapper or a good consultant, check out with these guys. They've been fabulous to work with. I want to just end it here and say a moment or two about the toolkit. When you have a developer like Wind Development come into your city, they don't need a toolkit, right? They've got the staff, they've got the money, they know what they're doing, right? They can read our codes, they can figure out the pro forma on their own. What we have in Holyoke now, what's so great is some of our homegrown local developers, people who 10 years ago weren't even on our radar. One of our best, I'm looking at it right now outside my office window, one of our most recent developments that's a collaboration with Holyoke Community College with the culinary department on the bottom 2 floors and 18 market rate apartments right on Race Street, which 15 years ago you would never have imagined market rate housing on Race Street. The 2 gentlemen who bought that building and did this weren't on anyone's radar 10 years ago. We have people who have grown up here generationally who are starting to buy properties throughout the city and fix them up. We want to be able to work with those local developers. People want to do those 4 to 14 or 20 units, right? Rehabbing our beautiful buildings, this beautiful stock that could never be built again, and give them the information. Here's what we predict as possible obstacles for your development to rehab this building. Here are the opportunities, be it through MassHousing, be it through other programs through mass development to get some capital to get your program going. So we want to provide this toolkit that will also be informed by developers who have done work in this neighborhood and what the challenges and opportunities are. So this toolkit is something I want to have in my office that when developers come in and say, we want to find some property, here's the properties you should be looking at. When we put property out for sale, we should be able to give some more information with it, not just be like, well, good luck. It's selling as it is, right? We want to give them permission, give them information and some data. And the last thing I'll say, coming full circle, is the implementation. We have an urban renewal plan in the city of Holyoke. Probably many of you on this webinar are also working on a rapid recovery program, which was provided by the state money, right, to look at our downtowns and what we need. All the same ideas come back, right? Infrastructure improvements. How do you bring residential back to downtown? How do you support your small businesses? What are the economic development opportunities? Now we have the Neighborhood Hub Grant program with all this data. I have the information. Tax credits are nice, but I'm hoping that ARPA fund is real money up front that we can get housing done, because the time that it takes to get housing back online when we're in the middle of facing this, and this housing crisis was pre-COVID. Let's not blame this housing crisis just on COVID. This was well before COVID. We're not making housing fast enough. And if places like Western Mass want to have any chance of seeing population increase and additional development come out here, we need housing. So I plead to the legislature and my former colleagues that those incentives that you're putting together are great, but they need to have money up front. And perhaps looking at a city that has done all this work that you've asked us to do, there should be a pathway for implementation funds to implement all this stuff that we have ready to go. So hope I got us a little bit back on time. I know we've got a lot more great stuff to go over, but again, thank you for your time. Thanks for listening. Thank you to Frances and her team. And I'm looking forward to working with Lynn and her team as we wrap this up over the next couple of months. So again, thank you, and happy to address questions now or later.
Thank you so much, Aaron, Lynn, and Nels for that wonderful presentation. Before we move to the Q&A, just want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Hina Wozni. I work as an associate attorney in the legal division of MassHousing. I've been at the agency for a year. I graduated from law school, Boston University School of Law in 2019. So happy to be here moderating this event and being a part of this discussion. With that, we will move to the Q&A, and we do have one question from Maggie House. What strategies do you use to prevent gentrification, / prevent displacement? Is this a part of a toolkit you provide to developers?
That's a great question. We have been very mindful of the concepts of gentrification for a while now since we implemented our urban renewal plan. Couple things to keep in mind. So one, we are mindful and continue to make sure that we are not displacing anyone when we bring in developers. Most of the properties that we're looking at and evaluating through this, and most, if not all, the city properties or my redevelopment authority properties that we try to move are not utilized and are empty. So we're not moving anybody out in that respect. You can look at what we've done with the Lyman Terrace project here in Holyoke, which was arguably one of the first public housing projects ever done in this country after World War II. And we spent money and we worked with MassHousing and others to rehab that and make sure that those opportunities for families there got better quality housing, could stay in their neighborhood, and was still affordable. The two tools that I want to look at, we have one building in Holyoke right now that is a co-op, basically owned by the residents. I want to see that happen more. I'd like to see that happen to a number of the buildings where people are living now, to have better investment and that ownership, not just home ownership, but this idea of place ownership, that they are part of the fabric and the important fabric of Holyoke. And so we're definitely looking at more, can we recreate that co-op model so that residents have more equity and more stake in there. Holyoke was built for 80,000 people. At our high point, we had 60,000 people. We now hover around 40,000 people. It is not our intent with any of this to displace anyone, but to add to our base and to add to the fabric here and continue the mix. Holyoke is currently 50% Latino, and we want to keep that and expand that.
Thank you, Aaron. It looks like we don't have any further questions, but feel free to send them in. We will have a panelist roundtable before we end our webinar, and we are happy to answer those questions. Then we will move on to our next panelist, or a final panelist now, Jennifer Jonassaint from Homeowners Rehab, Inc. And now I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Francis, for inviting me here. Thank you for all my cohorts. I learned so much from Katharine study. I really want to talk to her more offline. I've learned so much from Aaron and continuing to learn more. I think in our work, because we are similar in our goals, we certainly want to learn and grow and develop to help more people. Honestly, that is the best bet. So I work for Homeowners Rehab, and Homeowners Rehab is a nonprofit affordable housing. We create and preserve affordable housing opportunities in Cambridge. And when you hear the word Cambridge, you're thinking low-income people in Cambridge? Yeah, it's an oxymoron. So you are in the middle of Harvard and MIT, two huge universities, and very rich people, and there is low-income homeowners in Cambridge. I work with homeowners, not renters. So those who have owned their home, typically by a long time ago or recently, they want to preserve their homes. So we do, in the home improvement program that I work, we help homeowners renovate, restore, and remain in their homes. And we do that through a City of Cambridge CDBG grant that we get. We administer the funds to homeowners so that they can fix up their home. It is an income eligible program, which it's like putting a square peg in a round hole, because trying to find low income homeowners in Cambridge is really difficult. But a lot of people want to own their home in Cambridge. Cambridge is a very vibrant, multicultural city. It's close to everything, and it's a very walking city. If Homeowners Rehab were not in Cambridge, we probably would not see low-income people in Cambridge. And so I am privileged to be working for this agency. And I want to share some of the work that we do. I say we help one homeowner at a time. And for me, that makes me coming to work very happy, because if I could help one homeowner stay in Cambridge, remain in Cambridge, that they can build equity, have assets, and they can have a quality of life, and then that's worth it for me. So I'll be sharing a couple projects that we've done within the last couple of years, and some of the these particular homes that I'll be showing, they are deed restricted properties, and that means that the City of Cambridge owns the deed and the covenant rights to their home, and they get to live in it and get to own a portion of it. So at the time of resale, they get to resell it back to the city, and then the city gives it back to make it allowable to another low-income family. And I'm sure all of my cohorts know what that means, but it is the work that we do to help people build some equity, not market equity, unfortunately, but that's how housing is, right? So again, this is our projects that we did in 2020. 2020 was such a blur. 2019 into 2021. And this is a homeowner who was facing multiple challenges. Foreclosure, his home was in dire distress. Francis, if you can move that forward. So I'll just keep setting it up. His home was in dire distress. It was in an area of the city where it is what they call the neighborhood revitalization strategy area. So it's the NRS area deemed by the federal government as areas that they want to improve. And so this was very vital that we helped this homeowner to remain in his home. But we had a lot of challenges in helping this homeowner. If anybody knows Cambridge, this is called North Cambridge, so Area 11. And it's close to Our Life and all of the other good stuff. But this was a distressed home on a main road. It was an eyesore, and people were calling the city to do something about it. And of course, we were charged to help this homeowner remain in his home. So he was facing foreclosure. He was facing, he had hoarding issues, distress issues, health issues, a lot of issues, plumbing issues, roofing issues. The home was really, really not maintained for probably over 20 years. So when we came in, we had to work with the homeowner, and our process is a 10-step program process where we take the homeowner from the time of application to the end of the project. And so you'll see some of the work that we've done. Francis, if you can move this along. So, we show this because it went from distress to restored, and this took a lot of manpower, and you'll see some of the work that we've done. This looks good, but when we went into the home, it should have been sided, honestly. There was no running water. There was no hot water. There was feces, there were rats, there was mice, there was everything in the roof line. I'm not sure how this family lived there, but they were desperate for help. And they came to us for help. But when they came for help, it was not as smooth as this photo looks like. There was a lot of challenges in between, from application when the homeowner got ill and actually became disabled in the middle of the project, to a lot of other issues that we had to work with a lot of partners on. And I say that to say that a project like this that seemed very, very simple, through the process is very, very difficult without partnerships, without collaboration. I know Aaron talked about, working together with others. We cannot do projects independently on our own. And I think Katharine mentioned that to some degree in her talk. And I think it's important that we build relationships with partners, like-minded partners, or even partners outside of our like-mindedness, just to get sort of that strength and power. There's power in strength. And so we were able to, if we can move this along, if we were able to, again, update this non-functioning home. There was no bathroom on the first floor. The homeowner lived on the first floor, and there was no rental in the second floor because it was not livable. It was in danger of slums and blights, and that's just as defined by the CDBG, Health and Human Services. So there was code violation, there was lead paint, there was health and safety issues that no one should have been living there, but they had nowhere else to go. So there was a delinquency on the mortgage. There was no insurance on the home, which was actually one of the worst things that you could have for a home. And even in this state, the home was worth something. But because it's a deed restricted home, it is capped at a certain point. So this was a family of 6 that was living there. There were 5 adults, 5 young adults, and the homeowner who lives there. So what we do is we had to go in and create a strategy that encompassed everything from getting insurance on the home first thing, and the insurance company would not obviously put insurance on the home. So we had to stand in place of the insurance and ensure that this property was protected. because the homeowner had a lot to lose. We had to work with the homeowner on figuring out how to pay his mortgage. And so we had to intervene through the bank. And because I'm a mortgage foreclosure specialist, I knew sort of the background and I knew the servicing part. So I had to work with a mortgage company to create some measures around protecting this home and not allowing it to go into foreclosure. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. And then figuring out how to pay for things like water. There was a water lien, there was a tax lien, there were every single municipal lien that you could think about on this property. And we went in and we laid out a strategy for this homeowner. In the meantime, because they lived on the first floor and the bathroom was working on the second floor, they had to go downstairs every time to use the bathroom. So that was just not cool, right? And in the meantime, the homeowner had an amputation on his leg because he got an infection. So the project, in the middle of it, there was a disability that we had to work around in order to get this project working. So what we did is we broke it up into 4 phases. We had to, because it was such a lot of information. And we did exterior rehab first. We created loan funds with partner agencies. We made sure that we spearheaded volunteer teams. 40 individuals came together through our collaboration, because if we took the money to do this, then it would have taken away from the project. So we had to use all kinds of leverage creativity. I called it creative financing, to bring a team in of corporate volunteers from different places to begin to help with the hoarding and the disposal of the stuff that was that's accumulated. We also had to work with a complementary entity to do appliances and all the different systems that the home needed. Everything was broken. We applied for a tenant through CHA, another partner of ours. We allowed the homeowner to go through things like counseling, financial counseling and management. First-time home buyer, even though he was a homeowner for 20 years, didn't know how to manage their home. And in fact, we had to access disability resources, grant funds to cure the default, and acquire competitive insurance coverage. So what the homeowner did is, instead of living on the first floor post-rehab, we had to bring him down to the second floor and modify the unit through a state agency so that he can then get the rental income to continue to pay the mortgage. And it was a lot of creativity in terms of how that worked. Now, he didn't end up in a wheelchair, but he was in a wheelchair at some point. So we had to really work with the state agency home modification loan program, which came in and did the modification of his unit to help out with the rehab so we can reduce some of our costs with the property. And that worked out pretty good. But again, there was a lot of challenges in between. And we had 3 contractors on that project and getting COVID, right? And so COVID came and we had to shut everything down. And because of the compromised immune system of the homeowner, we really had to pay careful attention to measures, extra measures in place. And some contractors weren't open to that. So we did have some challenges, but at the end of the day, with a lot of resources, with leverage, with the homeowner's flexibility at some point and staff availability, because staff had to be very flexible around the homeowner's preference and style and attitude and personality and demeanor and all of those things that comes into working with somebody who's actually living in the home. And so there were 5 young adults that we had to sort of partner with and brought them into team meetings around, what are we doing for the family to remain in place? Because if this family had not remained in place, they would have been foreclosed. They would have had to look for rental income. And if you know, the cost of rental income in Cambridge is ridiculous. 1 bedroom is like $2,500. So they didn't have the funds to pay for that. He lost his job in the middle of it because he couldn't go back to work due to his disability. So we had to connect him to resources, including work with his doctor and his team around applying for different resources like Social Security, disability income. So it was very comprehensive in the work that we did. And, when we do the work that we do, and again, this is rehab in process, it looks very simple and it looks like, oh, it's just one home. But we were able to place a family of 6. And then at the end, we got a family of 7 who lived in the first floor. So we housed, more than 14 people in this one project. And so I say this to say that, doing rehab in this context takes a lot of manpower, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of measurement in terms of how are you going to do it, what strategies they're going to use, and resources. And the way that we do this is we do this one home at a time. And there's a homeowner post-rehab in front of the same building. We were able to get a lot of grant money to do the landscaping, which came after. And many people came by when we were doing this, and they thanked us for doing it. Many people came by and they said, this was such an eyesore. And there was a lot of negativity around the home because he had no choice but to stay in the home at this point. So it now looks decent post-rehab, of course, but doing this is a labor of love because we had to work with the family very directly and set a lot of boundaries, a lot of accountability. I became a social worker overnight. That is not my background. My background is in community development. But when you work with people, individuals who are having their home, in many, many different ways interrupted, people get different attitudes. And so we had to really be sensitive to the family needs and sensitive to neighbors' needs because there was no parking. When we did the dumpster, we had about 40 bags of trash, of hoarding supplies, both outside and exterior. This is the exterior of the home. And there was, as you could see at the bottom corner, there was a lot of stuff that he accumulated over years, and we couldn't get anyone to help us with the hoarding. So this volunteer team that came from Rebuilding Together in Boston, I'd worked with them before. They came in and there were 40 different individuals over 3 days that went, and young people, and we had lunch and we made it like a party. And we were so thankful for the collaboration because we could not have done it without this team of volunteers. And they saved us a lot of money. And so when we report these projects, the leverage money that came out of this was probably over 100,000. And it sounds not a lot, but when you're working with a small budget like ours, every single bit helps and it counts. And so they gave us a lot of man hours, and they just made it fun. They were young people, old people, and they facilitated the process, and it worked out well. But typically, working with a project of this size and of this magnitude takes a lot of strategy. I would say, I keep saying strategy, because strategy is what you need in order to make things happen, from income to insurance to systems that had to be put in place. It just took a lot of work. But this is not our typical project. We get these projects every once in a while. But I'm happy to report that the volunteers were happy. We were happy. We completely upgraded the exterior, new roof, new siding, new windows, new trim, rear porches, front porches, removed all the lead paint in the building. So a family of 7 who had children under 6 could now remain in that home. And we brought the electrical work up to code through many, many, many different strategies, as I said. It's another homeowner, and I don't think you have a photo of this. The homeowner now has a backyard that he can go to and sit in his wheelchair and enjoy his backyard, which before it was only trash and stuff. He couldn't do that. And so we had to go in and really do a lot of work around enabling. When we leave a project, we want people to access, and not only access, but maintain it over time, because we don't want it to be distressed. So what we do is a lot of education around home maintenance. And so we give them a brochure of next steps of what to look for in the summer, the fall, the winter, how to look. This is your home and this is an investment. How do you then maintain that home over time so there's no recidivism? And we're always here for people to come back and to get referrals and resources. So we call ourselves a one-stop shop: boy education, resources, referrals. And our reputation is that, people do come back to us for business. And we have long-term customers, I say, and I call them, the greatest satisfaction I get from my job is seeing projects like this, but more so people, because we do work with families. And so lot of leverage money, lots of beautifications and extended things that we did above and beyond because of the homeowner's disability. So
Jen, thank you so much. We're a little short on time. Do you mind if I move to the partners and funding
yes,
slide? Okay.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And this presentation is amazing. So wait, let me just reshare my screen. So let's see, slide. Okay, so I'll reshare there. And can you see it?
It's coming.
There, okay.
So we couldn't do it without partners. And I mean, I just, I really believe that partnerships are the key to doing anything. You cannot do anything alone. And a lot of my cohorts, or all of you guys would know that. So we got, we worked with the Historical Commission who gave us money for the exterior. And so we had to bring it back to its original state. They gave us money. The City of Cambridge gave us a lead paint grant to remove all the lead paint. Monotomy, which is a third party, gave us all the systems, the boilers, the furnaces, all the systems were put into place, washer and dryers, air conditionings, all the systems were provided by them. CAPIC as well, MassSafe came in and provided the weatherization to make sure the home was energy efficiency. And the Cambridge Energy Alliance also helped as well. The home modification loan program by Mass Rehab provided the modifications to the homeowners unit, which you didn't see, but we were able to get a tub and systems in place so he can be able to enjoy, cupboards that were aligned. He can put his wheelchair in and other things. And then the Boston Center for the Independent Living worked with him to get things like a sign in front of his home, a disabled sign, and to sign up for resources and to get him bus rides and stuff like that because he couldn't drive. And so they counseled him around that style. We're building together. One of my favorites, because of the volunteer aspect, that saved us a ton of money, about $10,000. The Volunteer Clearinghouse, which came in and was instrumental in helping us to leverage and put a word out there. The fuel assistants worked with us very closely. So now he has fuel assistants. He has systems in place through them, and he gets a reduced rate. And then the Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee, who really helped him to do his taxes. And there was such a comprehensive team. I am so thankful for the work that we do to help homeowners one home at a time. And all the funding resources that we have, again, we couldn't do it without banks and foundations that we also partner with in order to give us the funding in order to help and to deliver professional services like this to homeowners living in Cambridge who are low income. And so we do fundraise to that degree. And this is our team. It's just two of us. Sounds like a lot of people, but we are a dedicated team that we call ourselves the Green Team, because when we do work with a homeowner, we want to make sure that the home is energy efficient, well insulated, would have the same access as someone who lives in like an affluent area, so that they can begin to enjoy the home that they will live in for the rest of their lives. So, any questions?
Thank you so much, Jen. That is excellent work. We do have one question from Jacqueline Silveira. How can a homeowner apply for a restoration loan? Who can qualify?
So a restoration loan is, if she's talking about a restoration loan for the exterior, that's through the Cambridge Historical Commission, but typically they work with us. And so we partner with them in order to get the grant funds in order to facilitate that process. And so nobody gets a grant and walks off on their own. We are there from the beginning to the end. So she can apply, or that person can apply directly through us and contact us for the application, or directly through the Cambridge Historical Commission for that exterior grant, historical grant. Any other questions?
No. We can move on to the full discussion. We're a little over time as it is. So if Aaron, Lynn, if you're around, turn on your screens.
So this is an open session for all attendees to ask our panelists any questions you might have based on the presentations you've heard from Katharine, Jennifer, Aaron, or even the work Dawn is doing. Please feel free to send us your questions in the Q&A. I have a question for Katharine. You mentioned early on during your presentation that there were different forms of violations, from any violation, low risk to high risk violations, in terms of the healthy housing study that you did. Can you help us understand the different levels of violations? What makes it less of a violation in terms of how you define a low risk versus high risk violation in the housing setting?
Yeah, great question. So for the purposes of this project, we worked with housing inspectors to come up with a list of 5 violations that that they felt were represented the highest risk to residents. And we also did a literature review to support that as well. I think one of the interesting things about the housing code is that it's interpreted and enforced differently in different places. And so the list we came up with may not be the same list that may be relevant for other cities, because we also took into account prevalence of problems. So like, for example, not having a functional toilet, for example, is, or not having toilet facilities at all is a major problem, but housing inspectors reported it to be so rare that trying to find that that high risk scenario wasn't as valuable to them. So they wanted to be able to find high risk scenarios that were common and they thought represented the way that they interpreted the code represented high risk. And so what we included were not having a functional smoke detector, because Chelsea has the highest rate of fires in the county. Having insect infestations, having a violation related to overcrowded living conditions, and having garbage that was accumulating inside living areas of the home. And this was often an indication of some kind of either behavioral health concern with the resident or an issue of landlord neglect. And so those 4 that we thought were the most high risk violations for Chelsea.
Thank you.
I think there's another question for Kate. How does landlord outreach factor into this process in order to address the violations, given the high percentage of renters? I think this was during your presentation run.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the housing inspectors are really, well, for the most part, they're working with landlords. Most of the types of housing code violations accrue to issues with the landlord not providing something, not maintaining something. There's a couple that accrue to tenants for not maintaining things. And so the housing code enforcers are always working for the most part with landlords on addressing these issues. And in the case of the referral program, the referrals can be made for the landlord themselves if they're in need of financial assistance or other kinds of services, or for the tenants. And so in some cases with the referral program, the referral is for the resident or for the renter, but the landlord may be in that process because the issue may be also impacting the home being out of code.
We do have a question for Lynn. How do you work with your clients to support the implementation of the plans and strategies that you create?
Well, and I mean, this is obviously a new program that we're working with the Hub Grant program. And so I would envision that we after we get the housing toolkit created for Aaron, that we would be available as a resource going forward. If a developer comes in or a homeowner comes in, we can answer their questions, point them in the right direction as to whether, help them look at the numbers for the individual project, help them connect them with different team members, whether they need an architect or an engineer or a builder. But that's how I would see the sort of the implementation plan for the Holyoke Hub. Aaron does have a really strong team in place. We are also working with One Holyoke, who did their own building inspection study. And we're helping them map, with the help of Stantec, their construction needs. And that will most likely also be followed up with trying to look at financing sources to recapitalize those properties and help them with their capital needs going forward.
Seems we have a quiet audience, but that's expected after Labor Day and the summer. But I always have a million questions, so I can try to ask a couple and see what happens. Jen, I'm interested in how you set up continuous partnerships with different both banks and local partners. I mean, do you have to gather support for each project, or is it something that you now have continued, funds coming in and like project partners that are stable, or is it every project you have to go in and ask and receive support for?
And that's a good question. So over time, I think relationship building is so key and it's continuous. And so I reach out to my partners very often because I want to build relationship with them so that when there is time for a project, it's an easy ask. It's we know each other already. We know the work that we do. We believe in it. We're like-minded. And so I do have to present a project every single time, but because of the relationship that I'm building continuously throughout the year, it's an easy ask. If that answers your question.
Thank you. And then I have one more for Katharine. Katharine. I think that the program that you're part of at Harvard, from what and what I've heard from different cities, is actually has been very helpful to them as cities think about how to improve their housing and other aspects of the urban area. So if you can chat just a little bit more about it and whether there are opportunities for cities to apply or learn more about the work that you do.
Yeah, so the work that I did in Chelsea actually came about through the Innovation Field Lab at the Harvard Kennedy School that partners with 5 cities in Massachusetts. It was a course that was taught by Professor York DeYoung at the Kennedy School. And that program ran for 5 years, and but after 5 years, it stopped, and we're currently looking for additional funding to keep that program running for future years. But the way the program worked was over the course of 5 years, student teams worked in these 5 Massachusetts cities to respond to issues related to problem properties or housing issues, really defined broadly, and collected information about what the problem was that was surfacing for the cities, designed different innovative solutions to address that problem, and then worked with the cities to try to deliver a package that they could then move forward with. In Chelsea, because I ended up working in Chelsea for a bit longer as part of my dissertation work and as a postdoctoral student, and now as a research fellow at the Kennedy School, we've been able to move things forward a lot more because of this longer term engagement. And so that's the Innovation Field Lab, which hopefully will continue in the future. We also, I work out of the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, which is a a program that does a variety of things, including have each year have a cohort of new mayors from cities really around the world. And we provide leadership capacity building, specifically in the last year around responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, racial equity, inclusive economic development, and a range of other leadership training and subject matter issues.
Amazing.
I have a question for Jen.
Yes.
Jen, you mentioned that strategy was really important in modeling your program to assist George Wilson with the repair of his home. What
Yes.
advice would you give to borrowers, developers, or municipalities who are interested in taking on the same kinds of projects, and how should they go about modeling a strategy to help with disrepair of properties or projects in their own gateway cities or cities in general?
So one of the things is to identify those cities. We work a lot with the city of Cambridge, and they're one of our biggest partners and funders to identify those distressed properties. We also have a distress hoarding task force of everyone from city inspectors to social services and other nonprofits that come together to talk about, they identify the list of properties, additional properties. So we come together to talk about, ways to address and to meet the demands of some of those homes. And so we split it up into different groups. So I think a task force, an initial local task force that has a lot of people around the table, including and especially inspectors, those that are making big decisions, along with nonprofits and social service agencies, would be one of the best ways to identify distressed properties and begin to create a plan to outreach to those individuals. Because no one hoards just to hoard. I mean, there's also something behind that. So we work a lot with social workers. I have some on my committee that are dedicated to helping me when I have a clients, which I normally do. Probably 20% of our clients are hoarders, and I don't have a plan. And so they educate me, they train us in how to approach those individuals. And so there's a lot of relationship building again and learning and growing, because you cannot just approach someone who is hoarding with, as someone who isn't. So a lot of learning goes around, creating strategies to meet those people where they are, to help them. Really, the goal is to help them. And so that's the strategy, I would say, creating that task force and meeting the needs.
Great, thank you for that response.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all being here. It is definitely now time for some food. Before we completely leave, I did want to share the upcoming session. Hopefully you can see my screen, but next week's session is on underused lots for affordable homes. We will be joined by Wandy Pascual of the Boston's Housing Innovation Lab and the Boston Society of Architects, Robert Jenkins from the Brockton Redevelopment Authority, Jim Brooks from the City of Worcester, and it'll be all around how communities can reclaim underused lots to support the development of affordable homes. Again, this is the first of 4 sessions. All will be Thursdays at 10 a.m. And I want to a big thank you again to our wonderful moderators and to all of our speakers. I hope that you all had a lovely Labor Day vacation and now are slowly easing back into work. But thank you all again and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you so much, Francis, and everyone else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Have a great day.